ago, and then while she was here, she graciously agreed to do a public event where she can talk about her experience in a number of different places at the border doing migrant rights advocacy. So most recently, she's organized pro se workshops and court observation programs for people who have been returned to Mexico under the Remain in Mexico policy, formerly called MPP, the Migrant Protection Protocols, in Tijuana and San Antonio. She's also worked as a legal assistant at the Carnes Family Detention Center, also around San Antonio, and she was there during the time that the zero tolerance policy went into effect in the summer of 2018. A very traumatic time. Her passion for justice doesn't only show up in her work with migrants, but also in her past work as a dietitian and a food justice organizer. I think she really artfully connects to what she's doing today. So thank you, Casey. Please join me in welcoming Casey, and she's going to talk to us about her experience, and then she's happy to take questions and have a discussion.
Good afternoon. As she said, my name is Casey Miller, and I'm going to give you a little bit of background on my history before I get into this, and then talk about the war on asylum. So I've been working as an immigrant rights advocate for over 3 years now. I've had many titles and worked for multiple organizations, but in the end, I just truly love people and I'm curious about how we are all interrelated. Before I got into this work, I was a dietitian in New Orleans, so I like a challenge. And the city taught me so much about connection and deep human connection through the tradition of cooking and for the tradition of eating together. And so I often get the question of like how I got into this work or how those two are connected. And to answer that question, it basically came down to reading a book. It was a book that isn't even about immigration. It was called Off the Map. I read that book in 2015. And as soon as I finished it, I had this feeling of you need to get into family detention. So I'm not going to get too detailed into that story. But how I often answer the question is saying that being a dietitian prepared me for this work. In both lines of work, the basis of the relationship is trust. And I, especially in the work I've done in immigration, I'm talking about very, very sensitive issues with people I've often never met. And so the same is true when talking about nutrition and food. It's often very sensitive, often very emotionally involved, and that's how the two connect in my mind. So even though I read Off the Map in 2015, I didn't actually get started in immigration until 2016. I started off as a volunteer at the Family Detention Center in Dilley, Texas, which is about an hour south of where I live in San Antonio. After the full week of volunteering, which is what their class is going to experience, I started to become a long-term volunteer, which just meant going down there twice a week and preparing people for what is called the credible fear interview, which is the first step in the process to asylum, which is a very long legal process, which I'll get into in a little while. About a year after volunteering in Dilley, I got a job as a legal assistant in the other family detention center south of San Antonio in Carnes City. And the most, like Penelope mentioned, the most noteworthy thing from this position was working with the families who were reunified under zero tolerance. It was truly one of the most traumatic experiences in my life, and I can only imagine for the fathers that we worked with. Besides the reunification after the zero tolerance, we were also there for a reseparation, which was retaliation for a hunger strike the dads were organizing. And then those dads continued to be detained for 4 months, which is also the longest time that I was familiar with of people being detained. There is something called the Flores Agreement, which says that children can't be detained for more than 20 days, and these families, like I said, were detained for 4 months. Like I said, this was truly one of the most difficult times of my life, and I'm going to touch upon all of this later in the presentation. After over a year as legal assistant, I moved to a position at the San Antonio bus station, preparing people for what is to come after having been released from detention and going on to meet with their sponsors, usually family members in other parts of the country. And then my life got really interesting. While I was still working at the bus station, I began volunteering with an organization in Tijuana called Otro Lado. I honestly could not have imagined all I have experienced and learned and all the relationships I've formed through this work last year. I've spent a total of 8 weeks of the past year on the ground in Tijuana and continue to work remotely. My focus has been on fighting against remain in Mexico, also known as migrant protection protocols by our government, and by us advocates as migrant persecution protocols. I've been an organizer of a number of different projects centered around supporting people who have been forced to remain in Mexico to await their court hearings here in the U.S. And one of the projects I'm most proud of is organizing pro se workshops for people who have been returned under MPP. I'll explain more about MPP, some of the efforts and support for those who have been forced to remain in Mexico later in the presentation. So there's a lot that I do and have done, but that's enough about me for now, and I'll move on to what we are here to discuss, the war on asylum at the southern border. So as the title of the presentation states, this is about how asylum is under attack. And I have written multiple iterations of this presentation to try to tell the story of what is really happening. And then it just came to me this past Sunday that the best way to demonstrate what is happening on the border is to humanize this whole situation. It's to tell the actual story of the people that I have had the privilege of knowing, and really to show what it is that they have had to go through. So I'm going to do a little explaining of the facts and situation, but I'm also going to tell the stories of people who have been subjected to these violent policies and are still fighting for their right for asylum. And before I start explaining the government's tactics to impede people from being able to seek asylum in the U.S., I want to be very, very clear about this. This war on asylum isn't just a war on a policy level. These tactics are truly meant to break people down, in particular people from Central America, to the point of demoralization so they will give up. It is very intentional and truly meant to push people to the breaking point so they will give up the fight for their rights. There is no doubt in my mind about this after having witnessed all that I have in the past few years. So to begin, for context, the legal definition of asylum according to the U.S. government is a form of protection available to people who meet the definition of refugee. And a refugee is a person outside of their country of nationality who is unable or unwilling to return to their country of nationality because of persecution or a well-founded fear of persecution. They are already in the United States and are seeking admission at a port of entry. A person may apply for asylum in the United States regardless of their country of origin or their current immigration status. Asylum is granted when a person can prove that they have been persecuted in their home country based on race or religion, nationality, membership in a particular social group, or political opinion, or a combination. So asylum is actually a long legal process that usually starts when a person receives a positive on what I mentioned before, credible fear interview, which is what their class is going to be doing when they're in Dilley, and continues with multiple court hearings in front of an immigration judge. This process has changed with the implementation of some of the tactics that I will discuss. And just so you all know, the application for asylum is called an I-589 and needs to be filled out and submitted to an immigration judge within a year of setting foot into the U.S. So people may argue about when this war began, and I'm sure different people have different opinions. But in my opinion, this really all began as retaliation against the caravans that were coming up in 2018 from Central America. The first two policies I'm going to discuss, which are zero tolerance and the implementation of metering along the entire southern border, seem to be linked to the caravan that came up last year in April. And the other two more recent policies, Remain in Mexico and the transit ban, seem to be retaliation against the more recent caravan that came through in Mexico at the end of 2018. Again, this is arguable, but this is my point of view. So let's start with zero tolerance. Many of y'all probably are familiar with this policy. Gained a lot of press coverage and a lot of attention last year. So what this policy was any parent who crossed the border without inspection, or that's what EB means, entry without inspection, or between ports of entry, was separated from their child while in CBP custody. The child was put into government custody in a facility run by an Office of Refugee Resettlement, which is part of the Department of Health and Human Services. And their parent was put into ICE custody and put into adult detention. There were thousands of families who were victims of zero tolerance, some of whom are still not reunited. Many parents were deported without their children to their home country and are still not reunited, and it's become the effort of nonprofits, not the U.S. government, to reunite these families. Like I had said, I was at the Carnes Family Detention Center during this time, and when these separated families were reunified. To say the least, we were unprepared for the level of trauma that had been inflicted upon these families and for the amount of support that they needed. We were also used to working with women and children, but on the day that these families were reunited, our facilities switched over to fathers and sons. So I'm going to tell the story of a true hero who is pictured here, a man who has inspired so many of us, especially our staff at Raíces at the time, and who has kept us from giving up and to keep fighting. His name is Jorge, and he is from Honduras. Here is a photo of him the day he was released from Carnes last year on Thanksgiving Day. I was able to pick him up and take him to the airport. I took this photo because he actually did not cut his nails the entire time he was detained in Carnes for 4 months. And after being separated from his 9-year-old son for 2 months and then detained in Carnes for 4 months, he truly is the definition of resilience and determination, and truly one of the inspirations for us all, and a true leader and fighter for. Within a few weeks of them being detained at Carnes, him and a few other fathers actually started organizing a hunger strike in protest of their ongoing detention and conditions that they were forced to live in. The day before the strike was set to start, the facility was raided by armed ICE officers who quarantined 16 fathers before re-separating them from their sons and taking them to an adult detention facility. They were not told where their sons were, how long they would be separated for, and if and when they would ever be reunited. A few of the fathers that I took declarations from thought that they would never see their children again. It ended up that the children were kept at Carnes and the fathers were returned the following day. We were denied access to the children even though they were technically our clients, and when the men returned, they reported being threatened that if they did anything like this again, that they would be re-separated and that it would be worse than before. So I'm just going to play a quick clip, and I'm not going to play the whole thing, of some press coverage on Democracy Now! From this happening, just to give you a little
The immigrant by Los Tigres del Norte. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman as we turn now to Texas, where armed guards forcibly removed 16 fathers from an immigrant jail where they were held with their sons after being separated at the border and then reunited. A boy held at the Carnes County Detention Center, who's under the age of 10, spoke to reporters Friday and described what happened through an interpreter.
He recalls that he was in the school playground playing with his friends, and that he was called. He was asked to go into an office, and that's where he was told that his dad would meet him soon, but they didn't know when. The child said that he asked for his dad and that he was crying, but nobody told him anything. He kept begging, he kept asking for some responses, and nothing was told to him. He mentioned that he was taken into another room with other kids, and and like I mentioned before, nothing was responded to them. He said, I was crying. I cried the whole day, and I knew that my dad was crying. I saw the other kids crying, and the kids knew that their dad would be crying as well.
The child was speaking to reporters on the phone through an interpreter from the detention center. The reseparation of more than a dozen fathers and sons came in apparent retaliation for their plans to organize a nonviolent protest calling for all of them to be released. This is one of the fathers speaking to reporters by phone from detention Friday.
I was talking to other detainees, and there is a plan. We will not be eating, and everyone has agreed. We are doing so because we do not know what will happen to us, and we need to know if we will be deported or given an opportunity to stay here. We are asking the government to free us. We want to be free. We are not criminals. We want to be free because, as a human being, we deserve to be.
Many of the imprisoned fathers said they'd been tricked into signing deportation agreements in English that ICE told them were reunification papers. Hillary Clinton tweeted about the reseparation, writing, quote, "This is a heart-wrenching disgrace." Late on Friday, the fathers were reunited with their sons, and on Saturday, some were released. For more, we go to San Antonio, about an hour north of the Karnes County Detention Center, where we're joined by Manoj Govindan.
So that's all the plans of that. And the voices that you actually heard were Jorge and his son, were strong voices and advocates for everyone in their same situation, but who might not have had the strength and bravery to speak about it. And just want to make clear just how strong these two are, the father and son. So when I said earlier that these tactics are meant to demoralize and break people down to this point of surrender, this is a perfect example of what I was talking about. Though there are people like Jorge and his son who kept fighting and never gave up, there are far more who literally gave up, asked to be deported even though they had strong asylum claims. And who can blame them? The trauma that our government inflicted upon them is like nothing you or I could ever imagine. And truly, there's no way of knowing how these multiple separations and traumas will affect the development of these children, but one can only assume the worst. Jorge and his son are heroes to me and many others, and have given us the strength to keep fighting for justice. Their spirits are some of the strongest I know, and when I feel like giving up, I remember all they endured and get back up and keep fighting. And in a little piece of good news, Raíces has sued Geo Group for having reseparated them. Geo is the private prison company who runs the Karnes Detention Center. And litigation isn't expected to start until 2021, but there's at least a little bit of hope that these families will get some sort of compensation for the trauma that was inflicted upon them. So around that same time...
The immigrant by Los Tigres del Norte. This is democracy.
So around the same time as the last separated families were released from detention, the first metering report was put out by the University of Texas's Robert Strauss Center. Anyone familiar with the term metering? Okay, so I'll explain. Basically, metering is the term that CBP uses to for a process where it limits the number of people who can request asylum out of port of entry each day. As far as U.S. asylum law says, anyone who sets foot in the U.S. has the ability to request asylum. So what CBP is doing is they're stationing guards at the dividing line between Mexico and the United States so people cannot set foot on U.S. soil. Asylum seekers that show up there are told by CBP that they have to turn around and go put their name on a wait list and wait for their turn to cross and request asylum. Metering wasn't a new concept in 2018. It had just become standard practice in most of the ports of entry at that point. Metering started when there was an influx of Haitians to Tijuana and in Mexicali in the summer of 2016. And at that point, metering was implemented only for Haitians. Then, in the summer of 2017, metering was expanded to all asylum seekers in Tijuana and Mexicali only. And then beginning in April of 2018, possibly possibly in preparation for the caravan on its way to the southern border, it became official standard practice by CBP at most ports of entry. Each port of entry has a different system of how their lists are run. CBP sets a capacity for each day and communicates that to whoever is running the list in the city across the border. Sometimes it's Mexican immigration officials, sometimes it's private Mexican citizens, sometimes shelters, sometimes federal police. It just depends on the city, and that's why these metering reports are so important. Because the way the list is run is always changing, and it's important to have up-to-date information on how a person gets on one of these lists and how long they should expect to wait. As I had said, the first report by the Strauss Center was put out and released in November 2018, and since then 4 more metering reports have circulated. The first report contained information for the metering systems for 8 ports of entry, and by November 2019 includes 14 ports of entry. So there are quite a few ways that these metering lists have come to form in the ports of entry. I'm going to talk about one of the ones that I'm most familiar with and tell the story of Marlene and her family who were put on the so-called list. In my opinion, this is one of the most illegal lists that there is and shows the danger that being put on these lists poses. First, I will explain the list and then I'll get into Marlene's story. In Piedras Negras, Coahuila, on the other side of Eagle Pass, Texas, the list is run by a single private citizen who was appointed by the mayor of Piedras Negras. This man, who I personally met in Piedras Negras and have spoken to multiple times on the phone, has compiled a list in his head, as he says. And in order to be put on this list, a person must send him a message in WhatsApp, including a photo of their face, full name, date of birth, and country of birth of all family members. The asylum seekers are then expected to have their phone on and charged with saldo at all times, because this man can contact them at any point, day or night, to inform them that it is their time to cross. He then comes and picks them up to take them to the port of entry, even if it's at 2 a.m. Initially, when I got off the phone with this man for the first time, my instant reaction was it sounds like human trafficking. And who knows what truly happens to everyone who is put on this list. Besides that, there are a lot of issues with the way this list is run. First of all, a person must have a smartphone. Second, they must have the app WhatsApp. Third, they must have access to electricity to charge this phone at all times, and they must have enough money to have enough saldo on their phone to make sure that they can actually use it. On top of that, when I met this man and asked him if there was a physical list, he smiled, pointed at his head, and said that all the information is in his head. Also, with the way screenshots work, all of these asylum seekers' personal information is easily captured and shared with any and everyone this man may want to share it with. CBP directly contacts this man via WhatsApp audio messages to tell him the number of people who are able to cross each day. Who could have ever imagined a metering system like this? To me, it seems like fiction, but this is how they do it. And the U.S. government is compliant in keeping the system going. No questions asked. On top of all of this, according to the most recent metering report, this man is accepting $1,000 bribes to each person who wants to be put at the top of the list. So Marlene and her family, who are from Honduras, went through the metering process in Piedras Negras. I originally met Marlene and her husband when they were in Tapachula, Chiapas, which is in southern Mexico. A group of us organizers were doing asylum education via video to a group of leaders in one of the factions of the caravan, so they could disperse the information to other members of the caravan. Marlene and I kept in touch, and once she got to Piedras Negras, she contacted me to find out how we build a metering list, because she wanted to cross in the correct way. So I explained the process of being put on the list and shared this man's phone number with her. I informed her that she did not need to give him any information about her asylum claim, and that all she needed to do was give him the minimal information that he requested. Throughout the couple of months that she and her family were waiting, I received multiple messages from her questioning the integrity of this man who had been on the list, and worried messages questioning whether or not they would ever cross. After about 6 weeks of waiting, her husband was called to cross by himself and was put into an adult detention center in Pearsall, Texas. And she was left to wait alone with their 2 children for another 3 to 4 weeks before crossing. They eventually crossed. They actually ended up in the family detention center in Dilley and were eventually freed and are now living in Houston. They did not pay a bribe and waited patiently for their turn to come. In my opinion, they are some of the lucky ones because I can't help but imagine that everyone who is put on this list was so lucky. Obviously, there are many legality issues with metering that are currently being challenged with litigation. In a case called Asylum versus Wolf. Some of the illegal conduct cited in this case include falsely representing to individuals that asylum is no longer available in the United States, that asylum seekers need permission from the Mexican government to seek asylum, or that asylum seekers must apply at other locations. In some cases, asylum seekers were threatened and falsely told that if they did not abandon their effort to obtain asylum, they would lose custody of their children. This case was originally filed in November of 2017, and as of November 19th of this year, we had a little piece of good news that is related to the transit ban, which I'm going to get into. Basically, what it says is that people who were on the metering list before July 16th, which is when the transit ban went into effect, they are not subject to the transit ban. So this is called a preliminary injunction, and it protects this group from the application of the transit ban. Since they technically arrived at port of entry before July 16th, but were unable to ask for asylum because they were on this metering list. So it's these small victories, honestly, that kind of get us through these difficult times. So, as I briefly mentioned, in 2019, there have been two major roadblocks to this right to seek asylum: remain in Mexico, or migrant persecution protocols, and the transit ban, which is also known as the state third country agreement. And to be clear, these agreements signed between the U.S. and some of the Central American countries, Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras, involved in this, is also called the Asylum Cooperation Agreements. So all of these titles are used interchangeably to describe the same thing, which is the transit ban. So I'm going to start with Remain in Mexico. And if there's anything that I would say I'm an expert in, it's Remain in Mexico, or NPP. This is where most of my time, work, and energy has been spent since its implementation in Tijuana in January of 2019, January 29th to be exact. On that day, a single man was returned to Tijuana to await his asylum hearings that were set to begin in San Diego in mid-March. I was actually in Tijuana at this time and was able to meet him on the night of his return. His name is Carlos, and he is from Guatemala. I'm just going to show a short video clip of him being returned and the media circus that ensued upon his return to Tijuana.
The Trump administration has started to release small numbers of Central American migrants into Mexico, where it says they will have to wait months or even years while their asylum cases go through the American court system. The new policy.
I'm not going to show that whole clip either. I'm just showing you part of that just so you can get a visual of Carlos and all that he had to go through once he was returned. So after he was returned, he was actually taken to a shelter by Mexican immigration officials, where one of my colleagues was able to meet him, inform him of the legal services that we provided al otro lado, and he actually brought him back to our office where we all ate tacos and informed him of what was happening and how things were likely to proceed. He has 3 daughters who are still in Guatemala, and he truly seemed confused and like he did not understand what was happening. And to be honest, I don't think we truly understood what was happening either, or how things were about to change so much moving forward. We tried to put him at ease and let him know that we were there to support him. Unfortunately, he has since given up on his case, and I do not know his whereabouts. And honestly, this is the goal of the program: to create chaos, for people to feel overwhelmed and to not have adequate access to counsel, so they give up the fight. So before I get into some of the details of NDP and all the issues with it, I'm going to explain what the asylum process was like before its implementation. So a little over a year ago, a person could come to a port of entry along the U.S.-Mexico border, place one foot on U.S. soil, and tell CBP that they wanted to ask for asylum, and then were processed by CBP officers without having to wait on a metering list. While they were being processed, they were put into a holding facility at the border, which is often called an hilera because they're so cold that a hilera is a word for ice icebox in Spanish, and that's why it's called that. Sometimes they are released from CBP custody straight from the border to live with their sponsors, but more commonly they were put into ICE detention facilities somewhere in the United States. Their families, Dilley or Carnes, or the one in Pennsylvania called Burns, or an adult detention facility if they don't have children under the age of 18. If they do have a child who is 18 or older, they are usually separated and put into separate adult detention facilities. And in both cases, they were inside the United States for the entire duration of their asylum hearings, which often takes years. They were able to try and hire an attorney in access courts without having to cross the border in order to do so. Now, a person goes into CBP custody, is screened by CBP, not an asylum officer, about their case. It is not 100% clear how this process looks. I think it's different in each port of entry. And as long as they are Spanish-speaking, not Mexican citizens, not visibly pregnant, under the age of 18, or with a debilitating chronic condition, they're immediately returned to Mexico, to a Mexican border city, to await their court date in front of an immigration judge in the United States. Though there are the above exceptions, there have been many people who are pregnant, or who are Mexican, or who have diseases, who have been returned to Mexico. To date, this program has spread all along the southern border, to Mexicali and Juarez in March, and then to all the entirety of Texas in July, as well as Arizona. Since January, over 60,000 people, mostly Central Americans, have been returned to these dangerous border cities in Mexico, where they are essentially homeless and left to figure out the American legal system, where they will live, and how they are going to take care of themselves and their families for the year or more it might take them to finish their asylum case. So, the U.S. government justifies this policy with a section of the Immigration and Nationality Act, section specifically 235B2C, and I'll just quote what that section says. In 1996, Congress added section 235B2C to the INA. The statutory authority allows the Secretary of Homeland Security to return certain applicants for admission to the contiguous country from which they are arriving on land, whether or not at a designated port of entry, pending removal proceedings under section 240 of the INA. So, there are many issues with the legality of MPP, and I could go on for hours about all of the reasons why this program should not exist. So I'm going to talk about a couple of the main issues with this policy. First and foremost is access to counsel. Every person has a right to seek the expertise of a qualified attorney to assist them with their asylum case. It is extremely difficult for a person to find and secure an attorney when they are living in Mexico. Most attorneys don't have the ability to travel to Mexico to meet their clients and do the work and do the work necessary to prepare them for their hearings, especially in dangerous cities along the Texas border like Nuevo Laredo. People who are lucky enough to find an attorney willing to represent them often don't meet the attorney until the day of their hearing when they cross to go to court. And oftentimes, forms like the asylum application that I-589 I mentioned have to be filled out over the phone in order to have them ready for court. The number of people in MPP who are represented by an attorney is below 2%, which decreases the likelihood of winning an asylum case. Another issue is safety in Mexico. The state of Tamaulipas, which is where Matamoros and Nuevo Laredo are located, is designated a level 4 threat risk by the U.S. State Department. And travel to level 4 locations is highly discouraged. Other countries with level 4 designations are Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, and North Korea. Migrants are often at higher risk than someone like you or me in Mexico. Many of these border states, especially Tamaulipas, are run by cartels, and trafficking, kidnapping, and extorting migrants is big business and common practice. I'm going to tell you all another story which demonstrates how impossible this program is. This is the story of Alexis and his son. They were returned to Nuevo Laredo in late August. Almost as soon as they arrived back from the U.S., they were kidnapped by cartel members. and were held for 5 days. They were extorted, and their family, who they tried to extort, could not pay the amount that they were requesting. So because they could not pay, they were released and told if they stayed in Laredo, they would be killed. So the two did what they could to survive, and they boarded a bus to Mexicali and ended up in Mexicali and ended up somehow getting in contact, luckily, with an attorney from UT Law School, who in turn got in contact with me. I assume because she knew my work that I did in Baja California. And so, because I've been to Tijuana multiple times, I've been to Mexicali a few times as well, and I've worked with an organization along the border there called Border Witness. After consulting, because I never know all the answers, after consulting some of my colleagues in Tijuana about the next steps for Alexis and his son, we decided the best and easiest thing to try was what is called a non-refoulement interview, which is basically under international law, and again I quote, under international human rights law, the principle of non-refoulement guarantees that no one should be returned to a country where they would face torture, cruel, inhumane, or degrading treatment, or punishment and other irreparable harm. This principle applies to all migrants at all times, irrespective of migration status. And so basically a non-refoulement interview is an interview that is supposed to be conducted by an asylum officer, that is often done by CBP officers, where a migrant can describe to government officials about the violence they've suffered in Mexico, and their need to be removed from NPP and permitted to enter the U.S. These interviews also have a very low pass rate. It's about 15%, and it's all about the language that a migrant uses, and often because they have such little access to advocates and counsel, then they don't know exactly how they need to proceed in those interviews. So we decided that Alexis would try to present the Calexico Port of Entry. So he was accompanied by multiple advocates in Mexicali, and they attempted twice to request a non-refoulement interview, where both times they were denied by CBP to their right to prove their fear of remaining in Mexico. So we had to start again. We filed something that's called a change of venue. Since their case was set in Laredo, and they were in Mexicali, and would be therefore reporting to the court in San Diego. This motion was eventually denied by the immigration judge in San Antonio, who was presiding over the courts in Laredo. So because he did not appear and the motion was denied, he and his son were ordered removed in absentia, which basically means they were deported even though they aren't in the United States. The last time I spoke with Alexis, he was ready to give up on his case and move back to Honduras. Time will tell when he ends up deciding, because I do know that he is still in Mexicali. I bring up this example because it took a tremendous effort among 6 attorneys, 5 non-attorneys who all have other work to do to get all of this work done, and yet to no avail. It took us over 2 months to do all of this, and still after all of the time and effort, they are no further in their process than they were when we started. And this is only 2 of 60,000 people who have been returned. So if Alexis and his son can't progress with all of the effort and brain power on their side, how is the average migrant in the same situation supposed to prevail? As I said, there are so many issues with this program that I could discuss, but that could be a whole other presentation. And I don't think we have time to get into all of that today. So I'm going to discuss some of the efforts that I've personally been involved in to support migrants who are in NPP. Since I had mentioned that access to attorneys is a major issue, I and a team of organizers started organizing pro se workshops through all of Tijuana and Tijuana. So when someone doesn't have an attorney, they are able to represent themselves in court, and the legal term for this is pro se. There's a lot that goes into representing oneself in front of an immigration judge. First and foremost, there's a 10-page asylum application called an I-589 that is in English and has to be filled out in English. Then there's the gathering and translation of evidence to support the case. And then there's the preparation for the final hearing where the person has to testify and prove why he or she should be granted asylum. So this is a very long, arduous process, which would be quite difficult for someone who is able to read and write English, let alone someone whose first language is Spanish. So starting in March, we began putting on monthly workshops where we recruit volunteers, mainly Spanish-speaking attorneys, to assist migrants in this process. They have evolved and have come a long way and still continue today. If you're interested in traveling with Tijuana and assisting, you can come up and talk to me afterwards and give you that information. More recently, with the expansion of the MPP along the Texas border, I've been assisting a professor at St. Mary's Law School in organizing the court observation program in San Antonio. So people who have been returned to Matamoros and Nuevo Laredo cross to Brownsville and Laredo to appear in what is known as court courts, which are tent facilities set up by DHS to hold court proceedings. These facilities are highly secure and few people are allowed entry. The proceedings are held in front of a judge who is located in Harlingen and San Antonio via video teleconferencing. And because there's so much secrecy and access issues to these hearings, it is vital in order to ensure due process that we have observers in the courtrooms to make sure that the judges are doing what they should and the respondents are treated fairly, as well as having witnesses to the horror stories most of these people have been through. Almost every time I observe, which is weekly, I am brought to tears by the stories people tell about what has happened to them in Nuevo Laredo. One woman who appeared last month told the judge that her cousin was kidnapped by some cartel members from the bus station on their way to their hearing. She did not know of his whereabouts at the time of the hearing and was worried about him and her future safety once she went back across Nuevo Laredo. Currently, there is litigation challenging MPP that is being heard in the courts and will hopefully be decided on within the next few months. The case is Innovation Law Lab versus Wolf, and we're hopeful that MPP will be overturned soon and that people will no longer be subjected to this inhumane policy when attempting to seek asylum. The last and most recent change to the right to seek asylum is what is known as the transit ban or the Safe Third Country Agreement or the Asylum Cooperation Agreements. To be honest, this program is quite complicated and I'm not as well versed in this policy, and so I'm going to keep it brief and stick to what I know. This new rule states that a person who passes on land through another country before arriving in the U.S. has to ask for asylum in one of the other countries they passed through before asking for asylum in the United States. So clearly it is meant to target people from Central America and prevent them from being able to ask for asylum at the port of entry in the United States. This program applies to asylum seekers who arrive at the southern border on or after July 16, 2019. Even people who are in MPP are subject to this. But as I mentioned earlier when I was talking about metering litigation, there was that small victory that protects the people who had put their names on the metering list before July 16 and were unable to ask for asylum because they're stuck in the metering line. Coincidentally, the day that ruling was also the day that the first person who was subject to the transit ban was flown from El Paso to Guatemala City. His name is Erwin, and this is a picture of the back of his head right there once he arrived in Guatemala. And he is from Honduras. And like Carlos, he was returned alone, but in this case, he was taken by himself on an airplane. In the end, once he arrived in Guatemala, he decided to go back to Honduras and give up on his case. He was transported back under a program run by the International Organization for Migration, or IOM, and that the U.S. actually gave them $10 million to coordinate transportation for people like him back to countries that they did not want to stay in Guatemala. The new effort began after the U.S. government brokered an agreement with the Guatemalan government on July 26th. Like I said, this is also known as Asylum Cooperation Agreement, or ACA. This deal allows the U.S. immigration officials to make migrants requesting asylum at the U.S.-Mexican border apply for asylum in Guatemala first, and then so sends them back in order to do so. This program was rolled out in El Paso, but will most likely spread to other ports of entry in the coming months. According to the guidance, the only nationalities that this applies to so far are Hondurans and El Salvadorians. The government justifies this program by citing, again, another section of the law, 208A2A of the INA. An alien who may be removed pursuant to bilateral or multilateral agreement to a country where the alien's life or freedom would not be threatened, and which has a full and fair process for determining a claim to asylum or equivalent protection, is not eligible to apply for asylum in the U.S. When the rule says life or freedom would not be threatened, how does it justify this when Guatemala has a high murder rate, 5 times that of the United States, a tiny asylum system, and a weak rule of law? On top of it, they produce a high number of refugees themselves. So how can it support refugees if it can't support its own population? There is still a lot to be uncovered with this program, and the rumor is that ACA is set to expand to El Salvador and Honduras soon, and most likely to other ports of entry besides El Paso. So it may get worse before it gets better, because there are few NGOs on the ground monitoring the situation in Central America. It's hard to know if other people have been returned since Irwin, and if so, what the outcome of their asylum claims will be. Since this is all so new and has just started to be implemented, there's not a lot of information. And we as a team of advocates are still formulating our plan of action. As far as we know right now, the only group on the ground is UNHCR, who's semi-monitoring this. And sometimes they're pretty secretive about the information that they gather. When this rule was first implemented in mid-July, the ACLU, the Southern Poverty Law Center, and the Center for Constitutional Rights filed a lawsuit known as East Bay Sanctuary et al. Versus Barr. They tried to get a preliminary injunction so that the rule would not be applied until the lawsuit was decided upon, but that was denied, and the rule is allowed to be in effect. Like all of the other pending litigation, we will see what happens and continue to hope for the best. So, I know this is a lot of information, and when you really think about it, it can seem overwhelming and like we are fighting a losing battle. But as I learned from an international human rights attorney during family separation, we have to be patient, keep fighting for justice, because litigation can take years. And in the end, if we keep fighting for what's right, justice will be served. And in the meantime, we have to remember who we are fighting for. We are fighting for Jorge and his son. We're fighting for Marlene and their family, for Alexis and his son, and for Erwin, and the thousands of other people who we have never met and who all have similar stories. And who even, against all odds, keep fighting every day, who are more resilient than is imaginable, and who are true heroes, and the ones who continue fighting for their rights to seek asylum, fighting in the face of the unknown, fighting for a better future for themselves and for others in the same situation, and fighting for justice. So if they can keep fighting, how can we not do the same? Thank you for listening, and I'm available